Thank you.
This is on and off.
Okay.
Should I put that in my pocket? Oh.
Yes, we hear you.
All right, we're on now. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you, just to make sure. Testing? You got a test?
Test, test.
Did you get yours? Okay. I probably should do a better job of.
They're all afraid of sitting in the first row. Still, old habits.
I think all I have are the handhelds. This one is one. Test, 1, 2.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to everyone who's here in the audience tonight, and for those of you who are joining us via live stream. And an especially warm welcome to our panelists this evening, and a happy International Education Week to everyone. So my name is Marina Augustidis. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Global Business here at Merrill and Smith, and I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's event. So tonight's panel is a part of the Center's Distinguished Speaker Series in International Business, a monthly speaker series that is intended to address the latest trends in international business and bring content to our students that they would otherwise not learn in the classroom. This panel tonight is especially special as we welcome Smith School, or as we celebrate the International Education Week at the Smith School. It's an opportunity to celebrate international education and exchange worldwide, and it's an initiative of the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of State. So the Distinguished Speaker Series in International Business, or the DSS as we like to call it, is supported in part by the Center for International Business Education, a Title VI grant from the U.S. Department of Education. The Center for Global Business here at Smith is one of 15 universities across the country to have this grant. The purpose is to encourage international understanding, as well as the ability for U.S. businesses to compete globally. Tonight's event, Global Competencies for the 21st Century Workplace, is an annual staple of our International Education Week activities. It's an opportunity for us to showcase Smith School alumni and their careers in international business, and why it's important to them to have a global mindset in today's business world. As we continue the celebration of International Education Week, please join us tomorrow as we will have a PhD research spotlight as well during the lunch hour. I'd like to extend a special thank you to one of our other centers of excellence here at the Smith School for co-sponsoring tonight's event, the Center for Social Value Creation. So thank you for that. Before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping points of how tonight's event will run. If you are a freshman participating in the Smith Eyes program, you can scan your QR code at the end of the event. After the panel discussion, we'll open up the event to Q&A, so please prepare your questions now. There are 2 microphones, or there might just be 1 at this point, and we'll make sure to bring that around to you if you do have a question. Just stand up and introduce yourself and your UMD affiliation. If you are live streaming, you also have an opportunity to send in a question. You can tweet us at @SmithGlobalBiz or email them to sluna@rhsmith.umd.edu. It also should be at the bottom of your screen as you are watching the live stream. We will make sure to address your Q&A in the session as well. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's panel, our Executive Director of the Center for Global Business, Rebecca Bellinger.
Great. Thank you, Marina. And welcome to all of you and happy IEW. I am pleased to be here this evening again for this annual event. And I am especially pleased to be joined by our esteemed panelists and alumni. So all the way down at the end, I'm joined by Larry Gates, MBA 04, correct me if I'm wrong, Senior Global Trade Compliance Manager at Danaher Corporation. Next to him, coming this way, we have Vincent Tran, graduated here in 10. He is an international trade specialist and advisor at the U.S. Department of Commerce. We also are joined by Thamal Shriram. Yes?
Yes.
All right. We practiced pronouncing her name. Thank you.
you.
I do believe you are a double terp. So
I'm a
you
double
did
terp.
undergrad, graduated in 06, and an MBA 11. She's a director of health industries risk services at PwC. And then right next to me is Kristen Fallon, MBA 11, the head of content and storytelling at GE Healthcare. So please join me in welcoming, with a very warm welcome, our alumni panelists. We are here this evening to talk about global mindset. Global mindset is at the core of what we do at the center and really at the heart of our conversation tonight. Global mindset here at the Smith School, and according to Financial Times, is one that combines openness to and awareness of diversity across markets and cultures, the ability to see commonalities across those different places and people, and, most importantly, the willingness to investigate and even adopt good practices from wherever they originate. And we here at the Smith School further define global mindset, and we break it down into 7 competencies: tolerance of ambiguity, passion for diversity, global business savvy, cultural curiosity, adaptability, relationship building, and self-awareness and humility. And I hope that through this conversation with our alumni, we can come to understand both how these concepts and these competencies are really vital in today's workplace and tomorrow's, and how we can all work together to develop our skills to better understand and contribute to the world. So as Marina mentioned, this is a Q&A panel conversation. The questions I ask will range from current events to business trends to sharing some tips with the audience, with our students, about how to work on your own global mindset. And I will be turning it over to you at the end to ask questions as well, so get ready. So let's turn to our panelists, finally. I do want to mention, before I throw out my first question, that they're all speaking from their own experience and they're representing themselves. Even though they come from really outstanding organizations, they're not speaking on behalf of their organizations tonight. Is that fair?
That is fair.
All right. So my first question for all of you, and again, thank you for being here. You are on this panel specifically because you are very successful alumni and you're engaged in business across borders. So tell us your stories. What do you do in your current jobs? Is there something about your backgrounds that got you interested in global business? Is there one point that you can remember from your childhoods or anything of the sort that really got you interested in global affairs? And Kristen, let's start with you.
Hi, guys.
So today I work at GE Healthcare and I lead our content and storytelling. So that means, any of the ads that you see about GE Healthcare, that might be my team. So we tell stories, everything from the really beautiful emotional stories all the way over to really rational, kind of thought leadership positioning, all to build an affinity for GE as a brand. And it is a global role, so we tell stories globally to a global audience, but also bringing in different stories from different parts of the world to amplify them. And, if I think back on kind of what started my path down a global career, I did study abroad my junior year. I loved it. So if anyone here is thinking about doing it, just do it. It's amazing. But what actually kind of triggered me to follow a global path was my senior year. So I majored in economics, and I was taking an economic development course. And in this course, we were applying, the economic theory that we had learned to different economies, and really starting to appreciate, the macro or the micro levers that you pull to grow economies, and starting to really appreciate the differences in lives or in business across the world. And so I had been, for every summer and winter, I had interned at T. Rowe Price. I had a job offer to be a bond trader, and I turned this down and joined the Peace Corps. And this set me off on a very different path into international development, and then eventually to where I am today.
Thank you. Right down the line.
Okay, great. So, Thamal Sriram, and like we talked about, I work with PwC, but I've spent about 13 years doing professional services consulting, focusing on risk, internal audit, governance, compliance, and I think that my interest in this type of work and the travel and the global experience really came out of my own personal story as an immigrant and my family's story, and that journey that we took from India to St. Louis, Missouri, and then from there how we found our way here to Baltimore, and ultimately for me to Smith. And so I think through that experience I really developed a passion for travel, and the idea that when I was young the world seemed so big. And I remember, even as we think about way that communication has evolved, receiving those blue telegram letters in the mail and having these really difficult long-distance phone calls with family members, and then to where we are today. And it's so small, the world just feels so small. And I think that excitement of travel and making these long journeys and experiencing different cultures was why I chose to be my double major in undergrad was international business and supply chain. And so I just knew that was something that really fascinated me. And the classes I took, I really just enjoyed hearing those stories and thinking about cultural competency and how important that is to be successful in so many ways as an organization, as an individual. And so then when I was finished with undergrad, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought, well, I want to go out and try to solve interesting problems, and I want to work with cool organizations, and I want to be able to travel. And so that consulting seemed to check all those boxes, and I thought maybe doing this I'll figure out what I want to do with my life. And it turns out that might be it. and so as I started consulting, I worked in a lot of different industries in retail and banking, consumer products, manufacturing, and ultimately healthcare just seemed to be a common note. And it just really was an industry that I felt a passion to. It's of all the things that I'd worked in, I thought, everybody wants to be healthy, and there's nothing worse than being sick. And when I worked in healthcare, I always felt like I never wondered if what I did mattered, and if making this system better wasn't a good use of time. That's not a question that you have. So that's sort of how I found myself in my current industry focus, but also how even in this type of work you realize how empathy and cultural competency and that global mindset really does matter, even if you're not leaving the state of Maryland.
And I agree 100% with that. That's something that we try to teach our students too. Vincent, tell us your story.
First, thank you, Rebecca, Marissa, Cyber, all the faculty, it's an honor to be here. And my professional background, I graduated from Smith in 2010, and then had a brief work in the private sector at JP Morgan Chase while I was here, and then Bank of Montreal in New York. And then currently my role is at the US Department of Commerce. I'm the international trade specialist and advisor, specifically focused on financial and global financial services industry. And at the International Trade Administration, the mission is threefold. The first one is, of course, trade negotiation, US industry analysis, and then trade promotion. A personal background on why I became interested in international business and specifically international finance is that I remember when I was about 7, a kid, I was always very curious on why a US dollar that's $10, 1 0 behind it, had more value than another currency that had so many different zeros behind it. And then depending on how I could get it from either my mother or my father or some of my relatives abroad, I could actually buy more with it depending on what it's needed. And I think even though it's such a basic story, I think it's a metaphor for how global business is really, really practiced, even how extensive it is. It's very complicated at the bottom, but then also it could be also very easy depending on the different competency that people are able to draw down on. So that's my story. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And welcome. Larry.
So I work at Danaher Corporation. I've been there for about a year, based in Washington, D.C. And my specialty is really focused on cross-border transactions of physical products, so import-export in that space. So in terms of my background and kind of how I got to where I am today, I think the key is, first of all, my mother was a geography teacher when I was growing up, and so she was always kind of exposing us to the world and trying to think about it. And then we hosted an exchange student when I was in high school, and he and I were like brothers. And that really kind of changed the trajectory of my life. It really did, because it inspired me to study abroad. So I took a year off of after high school, in between that and college, and studied abroad. So I was in Spain, and then in college I studied international relations and studied a semester in Chile and a semester in Mexico. And when I was in Mexico, then I wanted to have an internship and stay for the summer, so I sent my resume around to places, and I ended up working on an import-export kind of consulting place. And so then I came back to DC. I was able to intern at the Department of Commerce, probably down the hall from where Vincent is these days, as a senior in college and in the NAFTA office. And so then, one thing led to another to get me into the career that I have today.
That's great. I love that so many of your stories actually start with an international experience yourself or a study abroad. And given that part of what we do at the Center for Global Business is study abroad for business students, I hope that we can reinforce that message for all of you. So let's talk about a hot topic. Everyone today, including here at the business school, is talking about disruptive digital technologies and AI, the future of work, that sort of thing. In fact, our first DSS this year, we opened in September, looking at AI and the global supply chain. And then even if we think about what the U.S. Department is doing, Department of Commerce or the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, all of these events with Talent Forward is all about how is digital technology disrupting what work is going to look like. So my question for all of you is, how do you use AI and digital technologies in your industries or your current positions? And how do you see these technologies changing the world, the way that world does business? Who wants to take it first?
I'm happy to.
Samuel, go for it.
Okay, I will. So I think I'll speak to it from a firm perspective on this one, just because I think that what's been really interesting to me, particularly in the last probably year or two, is the level of attention that many organizations, every organization, is putting on what is the digital journey? And it was in the infancy of what does digital mean? And what does digital mean to you? And many of us as individuals live a very digitally informed life. You know, you probably use some sort of a rating app when you're going to pick what restaurant you go to. You're probably watching what time your metro is coming if you go to the train station. You know, like everything you do now, you're probably thinking there's got to be an app for that. There's got to be a way that this is. So when we think about, we live very digital lives now, yet often when you go into organizational systems, those systems aren't designed to reflect that same level of efficiency and digital enablement. So these types of elements like artificial intelligence, blockchain, advanced analytics, these sorts of things, robotics, that seem very conceptual are actually now not even new technologies. They're becoming old technologies. And so from a firm perspective at PwC, we've really made digital the center of our strategy. And as an organization, I mean, we're recognizing that our people are probably the most important catalyst for our digital upskilling as an organization and to take us to the future. So, I mean, we're investing about $3 billion in advancing digital skill sets among our people, which means that training for these types of digital activities, really bringing those tools to your fingertips so you're no longer going out to find an expert. It's something that really should be, quote unquote, citizen-led. And a lot of organizations are finding that the most innovative thinking is going to come from the people that are already doing it the inefficient way and are thinking about the ways that work can be done better. So when you think about how that relates to the way we work and as individuals and how we think about things and how we upskill ourselves, the fluency in those tools does have practical application because I think more organizations are designing for citizen-led innovation. And I think that for PwC, our digital journey is really to enable our workforce to be able to then go out and talk to our clients about how they accelerate their organizations along that digital continuum and where they can find opportunities for automation, particularly when it comes to parts of the business that have been routine, rote transaction processing, sort of dummy activities that can be done through automation, or you can then apply robotics and analytics to draw better insights. So I think as a student, and using these resources is so important so that you can come out not necessarily being fluent, but being able to think about problems and solutions through that digital lens so that you're not stuck in sort of an old way of doing business because frankly, I think many organizations are trying to advance their workforce to be able to solve these problems in kind of the 21st century mindset.
Is that what the rest of you are seeing as well? Like a commitment to advancing digital? Larry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll just mention some specific skills. Data analytics and data science, an example would be using Alteryx. I think if you have that skill and you come in, you can get plugged in right away in a lot of cases. Data visualization is another that comes to mind. So Power BI, I see that used a lot. Tableau is used a lot. I'm sure there are others. But process automation, like workflow automation, those are all very concrete things. And one comment on blockchain from previous employer I saw, they did run into some trouble kind of implementing blockchain, so it may be on a different kind of path of adoption, but it's a buzzword for sure. But I think, but all of those skills are valuable, and coming in with that is certainly much appreciated.
Yeah, and I would even say I completely agree. And I'll give you guys 3 really tangible ways that I'm seeing digital and artificial intelligence take place in the world I work in. So one is in the way that we work. So, we are a global business. We have hubs all over the world. We work in 150 countries. But one thing that you don't hear us talk about really loudly is actually a lot of our employee base is becoming more and more virtual, or if not virtual, at least not co-located. So, if you look at my team, some of them are based in hub offices, but some are not. some are based out of their home offices. And it's digital technology that's enabling us to create this sort of virtual collaboration and workspace. And what it means for me as a leader is I can hire the best talent. I can find them anywhere in the world, and they don't have to be located in one particular office. And so I think we're really starting to see a shift in how we hire, which is really exciting. It also means you got to bring your A game, because you're not just competing with the people in your town anymore. You're competing on a global marketplace. Me as a marketer, I also see it because, AI in particular is changing the way that we market. So we have 38 different regional websites. We don't just manage one that's all over the world. They're regionalized, they're localized. And so artificial intelligence is enabling us to more quickly translate all of our content. You need a human to kind of check it, but you can provide your audiences a much more rich experience wherever they're at. And of course, you can personalize content. And you guys all experience that when you go on a website and up pops a pop-up, and it's like they were reading your mind that you needed a new pair of shoes. That's us on the back end reading your data. So I think really exciting. And then one more tangible example is in the healthcare industry. So we're all recipients of healthcare. And there's really high rates of burnout among doctors. It's actually like a thing that the medical community talks about. And part of the reason is that they're just overburdened with administrative work. And artificial intelligence is helping to reduce the amount of administrative work that they have to do so that they can spend more time with their patients. So in all of these examples, I think that AI can really enable humans to actually be more human in many ways.
And it sounds like AI is also encouraging me to buy more shoes. So.
Yes.
Vincent, I actually had a different question for you, changing topics a little bit. Another really hot topic that we're talking about in the center and pretty much everywhere in DC as well is this trade war with China. Things might be getting better. That's what we heard last week, at least, that maybe there was an agreement that was going to be made to roll back some of the tariffs. So I don't want to ask you specifically about our relationship with China, but can you tell us a little bit about or help us understand how tariffs themselves are used as a trade policy tool?
Thank you for that question. So tariff is one of the tools for international trade that policymakers have used, global policymakers have used here in the U.S., but also abroad. That's used. There's various other trade tools that policymakers use to enable the policy objectives: tax incentives, regulations, various sub-regulation in industry, various regulation, trade barriers, technical barriers. And then if we look at tariff at hand and the various trade tools, and we have to look at it in historical context. If we really think about it, the country, we can trace the country's independence or country independence and a revolution to the Boston tea movement, as we know, in 1773. So a good global leader, I think, is to be able to understand all the different tools, not just tariff, but all the different tools out there that policymakers have used or are using, and then going back to your 7 competency, be able to distill those to ensure that whatever the tool is used, then be able to work that into the company to be able to be successful.
That's great, thank you. And Larry, a little more interpretation of this. You work specifically in export compliance. Can you speak to the effect of tariffs that you have seen on U.S. industry, or what you think companies are doing to cope with this?
Sure. Sure. So we certainly see an impact. I can say a little bit about our company. We just today had an all hands, and our CEO was talking about the business in China, and there's a lot of activity there and growth, and the trade war is an issue, but he never mentioned it once because it's something that we're going to move past long term. In terms of things that people can do, there's various mitigation kind of strategies. One would be, first of all, call the lawyers and try to get an exemption. That is certainly something that a lot of companies did right off the bat, and It worked for some, not for most, but those are still coming out through the Department of Commerce. And but there are other strategies. So I would say a good example is there are rules around a thing called duty drawback, for example. So a company can, if it can prove that it exported a product after they imported it, then they can get those duties back. And it's a strategy that didn't have a lot of attention until suddenly the tariffs went up to 25%, and suddenly that became, the dollar value of impact of that just skyrocketed. So there's a lot of work on that type of activity. Some other kind of more specific techniques also, looking at your production flows, looking at your sourcing patterns, maybe moving manufacturing or part of it here and there. I mean, there's a lot of different things that companies are definitely looking at. There are instances where they've brought production back to the U.S. I've seen that happen at least once, but it's just as likely. Like I used to work at Cisco, and they had manufacturing in China and Mexico. So as soon as the China tariffs went into effect, I'm pretty sure, I wasn't working there at the time, but I pretty much know how it works. They just shifted and started shipping from Mexico. I mean, they had a heads up that this was a possibility, So anyway, there are a lot of, I think what it all boils down to is adaptability and being able to be resourceful and find a way to manage it. And I think that's what companies are doing as much as they can.
Great, thank you. And sticking with this idea of trade, we can't forget that there seems to be some movement or some will to bring the USMCA trade agreement, which is U.S., Canada, Mexico, to the House next calendar year for a vote. Vincent, from your perspective, can you tell us why this is an important trade deal for the U.S.?
The overall, the NAFTA, USMCA now, it's a very important trade deal, in my personal opinion, because there's twofold. The first one is if you look at Canada and then Mexico too, and Canada, first is very close, but then also borders country. But then if you look at especially Canada, it's the similar development stage with the U.S. So it's not one kind of goods or one kind of trade. It runs from manufacturing old goods, but also the new digital trade goods that are happening. So having a trade agreement that is upgraded to the 21st century is very important and very, very important. And then secondly, from what I've seen with U.S. companies and U.S. companies, when they are just being a domestically oriented, so all the revenues from the U.S., when they are first looking at global expansion, their first country is usually Canada, and then it's Mexico. So those are the two countries that they'll look at first. So that's, as we know, a lot in business, the best that a trade agreement can do to facilitate trade would be naturally USMCA.
And I think that that's something that I can speak to in the state of Maryland. If you look at Maryland businesses, the number one trading country for Maryland businesses is Canada. So you make a really great point. For the rest of you, Canada, Mexico, are these places that your companies are doing business? Are these important trade partners for you?
Yeah, certainly. I think that for us, we want to be able to help our clients that are that have operations and are going to be impacted by this. And so for us, it's really a matter of helping them to position, to interpret, to kind of scenario plan what would happen, and then also to think about how they're preparing for change. How are they diversifying their supply chain? How are they thinking about technology? How are they positioning themselves from a policy perspective? And how well are they investing in kind of securing their interests? And how clear are they in that? I think a lot of organizations we're seeing, because there's so much uncertainty around it, they really are hesitating to act, and a lot of people are kind of doing a wait and see. And so we're trying, a lot of what we do, and our folks that specialize in this area is really looking at scenario planning and helping them to understand the potential outcomes.
Great, thank you. Kristen, a question for you. So you're not just a Terp, but I understand that you're also connected to our co-host for tonight's event, the Center for Social Value Creation, and you are an executive advisor for CSVC. Is that right?
I am.
Okay. So I'd like to know more about what that means. But related to our questions here for the panel, I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about corporate social responsibility. What projects have you seen or do you have experience with, or are you working with CSVC on that have a global impact? What does CSR mean on a global level?
I think we're at a really interesting point in sort of understanding what CSR is. It's evolving a little bit. If I think pure CSR, a company that comes to mind right away is Patagonia, right? Mm-hmm. Probably many of you are wearing Patagonia right now. This is a company whose entire mission is to enable a sustainable planet, and they do it by making high-quality clothing with recycled or sustainable materials. So a great example of, an entire supply chain, employee base, and business that's dedicated to it. I think that you can also expand corporate social responsibility. It doesn't have to be so pure. And certainly at GE, for example, we're a very purpose-driven brand. We build technology that makes people's lives better. So we build power plants that gives them access to electricity that improves lives, or healthcare equipment that's safe and improves your health. And so that's, something that's just inherent to the business and the brand. I think also, just speaking on a GE experience, how you treat your employees is really important, and that's a part of your social responsibility. And certainly for us, we enable flexible work environments, or we actually have a 4-month maternity leave policy, which is like a big deal in the industry. And we're not seeing, any negative impacts to productivity, right? We're just seeing positive things. So there's many companies that are doing that, and I think kind of looking broadly at what it means to be socially responsible is really interesting. And if any of you guys followed the Business Roundtable, did anybody follow that announcement in April? A few of you. Check it out. If you're interested in social responsibility, this was a big moment. So a number of American companies came together, and their CEOs came out and said that it's not just the responsibility of a business. A business shouldn't just be responsible to its shareholders. It should be responsible more broadly to its stakeholders. And there's some criticism. Maybe this is a PR play. Maybe this is just lip service. But I'm not going to comment on that, but I'll say that this is a big moment when you have companies coming out and saying this. Mm-hmm. And certainly these were American companies, but they're American-based. They're global companies. So this is the sort of thing where you see a small movement that can really take shape. And I think the Center for Social Value Creation has a really fun year ahead to kind of explore, what it means to be a good socially responsible business.
Yeah. And Thamal, we were talking a little bit earlier. You also have some experience in this area as well. Can you talk about maybe some other things that you've seen?
Sure, yeah. I about like 5 or 6 years into my career, I did a fellowship and I went to Chile, actually, and did a pro bono consulting for a high-impact entrepreneur in Santiago. And it was, to this day, one of the best professional experiences I've probably ever had, because you're really focusing on this organization that's got a mission-oriented, vision and an idea, and really helping them to bring it to life without sort of the constraints of actually being like employed and having to worry about that. You're just freely supporting them in a way that's very skills oriented. And I think that when I think about the study abroad or working abroad or any of these types of international volunteer opportunities, to really take an opportunity to do skills-based volunteerism, because all of us have all these skills that we've gained through our life experiences and certainly through our academic experiences that can have tremendous impact in other countries or in other communities outside of your own, and to be able to do that in a way that draws on those skills is going to be really valuable to these organizations. And don't get me wrong, I think building a house and planting a garden and all of that matters too. It's just this other area of when you think about that ROI on your business acumen and these skill sets that you're building here, they can also add another level of impact. So I think that's just another layer that entrepreneurial type of experience really opened my eyes to, is that idea of skills-based volunteerism.
For impact, it sounds.
Yeah.
That's great. So turning back to this idea of a global mindset. So the foundation of global mindset, as we define it here at the Smith School, is an awareness and understanding of world events and how they impact both the global economy and specific industries. We've talked about a few already tonight. Tariffs and trade wars with China, for example, USMCA. And in our newest video series coming out of the center known as the Global Pulse, we've also talked about fires in the Amazon, Brexit, elections in Argentina, India's economy, et cetera, just to name a few other things happening around the world. Could each of you mention one event from the past year that you think has been most influential or maybe had the greatest impact on your industry?
Start. So this actually didn't happen this year, but we're seeing it play out really heavily this year. So GDPR. Who's heard of GDPR? Okay, not too bad. I saw a few hands in the front. You guys probably didn't see them. So GDPR is a global data protection regulation. It came out of the European Union, and it's a big, long list of things, but it effectively means, for people like us in the room, you can no longer get spammed in your email. If you're a European citizen and somebody has your email address, they can't spam you, right? And how annoying is it to get spammed? I mean, nobody likes it. There's a lot of other things that it has to do with data privacy and protection as well. But, I think in our industry, what's so interesting is, one, it is a great law. It is a great regulation, and we should be protecting people's privacy and their data, and how it's used in marketing. And so even though this was something that was regulated out of the European Union, as a global business, I'm basically having to apply this behavior around the globe. So what I think is very interesting is you're going to start to see this sort of thing, a piece of legislation come out of one region or one place in the world, but it has a global impact, right? And you're probably, if you're following the California fuel emissions discussion right now and all of the automakers, you know that California, if they can pull this off, could have massive impact on the rest of the world. And if you're a voter in California, then you as an individual really have an opportunity to have a voice that's bigger than just your state. So I think it's an interesting time to see these sort of things crop up, and I think as global citizens, we need to be aware of them and watching them.
Great. Well, on the global events, there's multiple events that has affected my industry and the financial services industry. But one key point that I think I want to make to the students, especially, is depending on which industry you're in, but also which area of the region of the world you are in, I would encourage you to look at that local newspaper. So for instance, financial services with the UK, we read the Wall Street Journal here in the US, but to really understand the perspective of the clients of the country in the UK would be the Financial Times, the newspaper there. And when you read the newspaper from either the UK or if you're in Asia or India, the important world event at that moment in time is different. Sometimes it's different, but definitely a lot of the time is a different perspective. And when you get that different perspective, that's when you're able to help your client, help your career, and then really help your job at hand. So depending on the region, and then also the newspaper that one reads, it varies, and it has to vary because sub-clients have different goals and different objectives.
Larry, do you want to add to that?
You mean answer the question, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah. No, I think the tweets on the trade war is not even close for my particular focus. I will bring out the whole data element that we talked about, because one thing that we've really had to advance within our company is we have a distributed kind of model. So we have about 20 large operating companies, and we weren't able to answer questions as quickly as we needed to. And you can imagine when some of these tweets came out, the CFO wants to know what's the impact. And so it's really kind of where the data comes in. We've had to do a massive amount of work on that. And we're a lot more prepared. So we're ready for the world events. And now it's hopefully going to flip to better news as the tariffs come down. We'll see. But then we'll be able to give good news as opposed to bad news. But.
And I'll add, I needed a minute, thank you. But, you know, because in professional services, everything you mentioned matters significantly to those organizations that are very much directly impacted in the way that others have talked about. And so whether it's increased regulation, it's helping organizations prepare for, interpret, and kind of operationalize that regulatory requirement. When it's deregulation, it's a matter of what opportunities that pose and how do you take advantage of those opportunities in a way that's still safe and appropriate and you know, within the confines of kind of your standards of operation. So for us, it's that adaptability. So what Vincent was talking about was really understanding what's going on and the importance of navigating that socio-economic landscape for the organizations you serve. With my focus being primarily in healthcare, the last many years, you know, I think as the Affordable Care Act was passed, there was a lot of preparation for helping organizations understand what that meant. Then with the new administration and the different efforts around the repeal and replace, what does that mean and what are the prospects around that? And then now as we look at the next political cycle and potential changes in the payer landscape and access to care, what does that mean? Along with things like consolidation and consumerism and digital disruption. So all these types of environmental, it's like a tidal wave of disruptive forces that I think specifically in the healthcare industry that I'm focused on now.
A tidal wave of disruptive forces. I might quote you on that. That's a good one. And that tidal wave does imply that you at least, and I'm sure all of you, have encountered some challenges that you have faced as you're working across borders. So I'm going to ask each of you rapid fire, 1 minute each. Can you talk about a challenge that you faced? And I know we've already talked about adaptability quite a bit and global business savvy, like trying to get news from other places around the world. But if you can name a challenge you faced and which of the 7 competencies you relied on to overcome that challenge.
Great. Well, I'll start with so in one's career, and in my career, sometimes you are put in a position that you didn't choose, or you just have to do work for the organization. In my career, in terms of I was put in a position, there was a brand new culture, and sometimes the culture is not really what one is used to. So in that instance, I had to make sure that first you have to be very, very open-minded to learn, adapt as we learn, but also be generally open-minded to learn about that culture, and then be able to find win-win scenarios. Even though we're talking about all different cultures, we are all humans at the end of the day. Everyone has the same needs, the same wants. So as long as you connect the wins and wins, you're able to advance the goals and for the organization. So that was what I did. And at the end, it did come out to be a great win for both organizations and a very big win for business.
Great, thank you.
For many organizations, I think many tasks can now be delivered through offshoring model. And that can be, I think that's evolved to take form in different ways. And that's certainly something that we at PwC, we utilize and we're really proud of as an extension of our domestic footprint, is that we now have a 24-hour service cycle. And it creates a lot of opportunity for our teams to take advantage of the time zone differences. Certainly there are cost opportunities associated with the model as well. But I think one of the elements that was probably, and not just for our organization, I'm sure for many that have a offshoring model, one of the biggest challenges was getting over the cultural I'll call it a speed bump, because you have one organization of so many different individuals that come from many different places, and we all kind of have we might be, in America, and we might identify with certain aspects of American culture, but American culture in Baltimore, Maryland, and American culture in Louisville, Kentucky are two different things, and we're still trying to create a model that works. And so I think what has been interesting for us in that journey is elevating the cultural competence of everybody. And how do you do that? How do you, in such a diverse workforce, and diverse on every level, right? From when it comes to age, gender, sexual orientation, veteran status, generational differences, you name it. You're working through these individual complexities to find kind of how do we make this work and do it in a way that really comes across as one firm, one organization. I think that's been a really eye-opening journey for me, and I've been involved in helping us do that and working with our teams in India. I think many offshoring models started in India, and now you're seeing that move into Southeast Asia, South America, even models that incorporate local offshoring to get over like PHI concerns and things like that. So being involved in that process, I think, has been one of the most eye-opening experiences in how that international business mindset is so much about culture and social understanding.
I'll give a very, very recent example from work. Candor and feedback. So if any of you have spent time overseas, this might feel, you might relate to this, because this is a little bit of a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's very true. So we recently produced this thought leadership paper, and I needed several members of my global team to give me feedback on it. So I sent it around, and I got back from one particular team in Europe, just brutalized this thing. I mean, it was like I had written the worst thing on earth, and they just tore it apart. And then I sent it to a colleague in Asia who wrote back, I can tell that this is a really important initiative that you're undertaking, and this is really important, and it's going to add so much value. And if I may humbly offer one tiny little thing, it was like, put the word "the" here instead of there. And what I knew, because I'm tapping into my self-awareness and curiosity and all these wonderful traits that we need to have as global citizens, is I knew that my European team, they're always heavily critical. So I had to read between the lines and figure out, all right, what's actually problematic in here versus what is it just, they're gonna go after it. And then with my Asia colleague, I picked up the phone and I called her and I said, let's talk through a little bit more about your feedback and exactly what you're thinking, and really had to draw her out. And I got amazing feedback, and I wouldn't have gotten it through an email. And I think if you're missing a lot of these traits that we talk about, and you just blast out your email, you're going to get a very superficial interaction with people. So you really have to make that level, or that effort, to go another level.
That's great. Larry?
I guess the one that comes to mind is, so part of my job is I do training. So this past year, I went to Japan and China and trained some of our colleagues, and then this year to Brazil. And what I try to do is to really kind of, first of all, I'm at corporate, so if I come out, there's already a bit of a dynamic, but I try to really kind of communicate humility and self-awareness. And there's also a dynamic of being a U.S. company and being from the U.S. I think there's, just from my own personal experience, I think there's a certain image people sometimes have of Americans that I try to kind of fight a little bit. Like, we declare our champion of baseball or football world champion, right? And that's sort of emblematic of some of the mindset you can be perceived to have. So I try to come in and have a little perspective about that kind of thing, and and connect to people on a personal level. And I'd like to think all of that really kind of pays off. It really does, because we're building partnership, really, and collaboration. So I think that's what comes to mind.
That's great. I love that the common theme from everyone is whatever the challenge was, the important thing to work on is cross-cultural competence. That's wonderful. Thank you. That's a great message for everybody. We do have time for some questions, so I am going to throw it open to all of you, to the audience. Do we have another microphone?
Yes, we do. Do you click that on?
Hello, hello. Test, test, test. Is that working? All right. All right, so do we have our very first question? Oh, I think we have one from online. Is number 2, so we've got a question
Hello.
right here.
Thank you for coming in. I'm Akarsh, second year MBA. So I was just wondering, working for a multinational company, how do you deal with different levels of digitization in different regions? Because, is it working? It is. So how do you deal with that? Because in the US, for instance, the reception or the need for digitization and artificial intelligence might be more than, say, in Asia, where you have cheaper skilled labor and where you don't need as much automation. So how do you deal with that mindset, and how do you make sure everyone is on the same platform?
Are you?
It's for anyone who can answer that question, honestly.
Maybe I'll start and then we can. I think that point you made about perhaps the need for it, the business imperative might not be there because of labor costs. Certainly, labor costs is a key opportunity, or just costs in general, cost reduction for automation. But another way to think about that is for a lot of US-based organizations, one of the challenges of adopting digital technologies is that they already are so invested in old infrastructure. And so if you think about just like with metro systems and bridges, in the developed world, or in the developing world, when you're implementing or building infrastructure for the first time now, you're going to be taking advantage of much better technologies than the bridges that were built here 100 years ago. So similarly, when you're thinking about technology adoption, the opportunity to take advantage of the latest technologies that actually are more cost efficient than a lot of the older technologies that have been already invested in many organizations is just another lens to look at that through. So I think we are seeing that those multinational organizations, even if they are based in developing countries, are able to take advantage because they also have the lower cost of labor to develop those technologies and implement those technologies. So there's just I think it's just another way of thinking about how the technology revolution will take place and who's really going to be at speed to market.
Yeah, I can't speak for our manufacturing. It's just not a space I know. But for us office workers, I'd say digital is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. We all use the same software on our computers, the same phones. We're pushing out on social media, we're pushing out stuff on TikTok or Instagram all over the world. So I think from an office environment space, I'd say it's all the same anywhere you go.
I can make an analogy on financial services, especially financial technology. So if you look at it, and to your point, developing countries and developed countries in the U.S. does have different, like you said, sometimes different business needs, but then there's always a commonality that sometimes kind of fly by. For instance, with access to finance, the underbanked and the unbanked. In some places, like you mentioned in India, there's a need for that with financial technology. And you've seen with a lot of these multinational companies are going into that. But then if you look at the US side, it might not be the same type of underbanked or unbanked, but the need is there. So to your point is that here in Washington, D.C., the needs is different than, let's say, in Kentucky, like you mentioned, or other places, like in places that's near, that doesn't have a lot of banking services. So there's always a commonality that if people can tread it, there's a business opportunity to do global business.
Let's move to the next question. I think we have something from online.
Yes, we do. We have a question from Peter. He's a University of Maryland student, and he sent us a Twitter shout out. So how do you see increasing dependence on data impacting CSR, specifically related to data privacy?
I feel like that's directed at me. Can you repeat the question?
How do you see increasing dependence on data impacting CSR, specifically related to data privacy?
I wish he was in the room. I would ask for maybe a little bit more context. Nima, I don't know if you have thoughts on this one either.
A little more context.
I'm so sorry. Tweet us back with a little bit more context.
Peter, if you're still there.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? I'll throw out another question to the audience. I know this is one that you want to answer. Everyone here is a student. Can you give us some advice? Can you give some of the students advice on how they might develop their own global mindset for leadership positions once they graduate?
Well, that's a great, ending question. So one advice that I would say for the students, and I wish I knew when I was at Smith, is looking at the future, 1, 2 years, 10 years, and looking at the trend of global business. And as we mentioned, digital trade, what kind of new opportunities could open up. For instance, we bought a financial technology that opens a huge amount of business opportunities for those that are ready with skill sets to capitalize on it and make business success. And then secondly is definitely the global competency, build up the global competency through study abroad. Maryland and Smith has a very great study abroad program from short term, which I did in Argentina, to long term semesters. So really look at that, those two.
I agree with that. Thank you. What else?
I would say, and I think a couple of you guys have touched on it already. I mean, if you want to build up your global competencies, definitely go abroad if you can, but that's not always accessible to everyone, nor is it accessible all of the time. And I think that these competencies we can build just by putting ourselves in different situations. So right here in a 30-mile radius, I guarantee you there are things that are different than anything you've ever experienced in your life. Go volunteer, go be a mentor, go do things that get yourself outside of your comfort zone. And, we look, like we in the hiring world, we're looking for these very traits that we're talking about here. And so the more that you can develop them in any possible way, the better you're going to be, not just from an employability standpoint to get your foot in the door, but to advance your career. And I think that, seek to understand versus being understood. Like really get out there and be curious. And we say a lot, the world and the business world is moving so fast these days, like be comfortable being uncomfortable. So get practice doing that now. Get uncomfortable, get out there and put yourself in these situations so that when you're in it in the workplace, you already know how to handle yourself.
I think I'll just add, because I don't want to piggyback too much, but along the lines of getting out there, I would encourage you all to even look at your own social circles. So with Thanksgiving coming up, and you look around your table or you look around who you're spending time with, and make sure that not everybody looks like you, and make sure that not everybody in your inner circle thinks like you. And it comes from where you come from. Challenge yourself to not just on your second or third kind of line of your social network, but really make sure that your inner network, your inner circle is kind of brings that diverse perspective, and challenge yourselves to make those connections and maybe examine why is it that, my social network or my community network or however you move through your personal, professional, academic life, examine why it looks the way it looks and how you can maybe broaden that perspective.
That sounds like a passion for diversity to me.
I certainly am on board with that.
Larry, you get the final word.
What comes to mind for me is you have to kind of figure out your angle to connect with people, because at the end of it, it's about connecting and understanding them. For me, for a while, it was soccer, and I would that gives me something I could talk to anybody from almost any part of the world. On our trip to Asia with a colleague of mine, he's from the Midwest and doesn't really have a lot of exposure to this, but he loves food, and he could, he can just embrace any kind of thing that comes at him, and it brightens people up, and it's a way to connect. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is trying to connect to the people and understand where they're coming from. So it kind of is it's a good way to do it. So everybody has to figure out their own, but I think it's all about figuring that out.
And it is all about connections. So will you all please join me in thanking once again our fantastic panel. I have very much enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that you enjoyed your evening with us as well.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you, guys.
If you're a freshman, we will accept your QR codes at the exit.